Hi, and welcome back to the Middling Along podcast. I'm delighted this time to welcome along photographer Jenny Smith, who dreamed of a career in photography since the age of 10, but ended up working as a publicist for TV and radio. After the birth of her son, she decided to follow her dream and begin working as a professional photographer and hasn't looked back since. She's also the co-host of the Dear Hormones podcast with Kate Bouse. We'll talk about that in a minute. And we're also going to talk about her passion project, 40 Over 40, showcasing 40 incredible women all over the age of 40 doing incredible things for womankind. Welcome to the podcast, Jenny.
Hi, Emma. Thanks for having me on.
So, if you're comfortable talking about it before we dive into the other stuff, you talk a little bit on your website about sort of discovering that you are perimenopausal, and I think, like other people that we've chatted to on the podcast, you came into that similarly kind of clueless, and actually your light bulb moment was listening to another podcast.
Yeah,
Is that right?
yeah, that's right. When I think back, Emma, I think my perimenopausal symptoms actually started at the age of 40 when I think back, because I remember my period started going really weird at the age of 40. And despite the fact that I'd had IVF and was very unlikely to have a baby, I went and took myself off for sort of 3 or 4 pregnancy tests during this time. It's crazy because I didn't even think for a second at the age of 40 that I would be anywhere near the menopause. It wasn't on my agenda. But then fast forward 5 to 6 years, I was suffering from some perimenopausal symptoms up till then, but I wasn't putting it down to anything. They really kind of kicked in around the age of 45, 46. And it was when my son was about 11 years old. And lots and lots of things were happening to me. And I know lots of women say this, but I honestly thought I had early onset dementia at one point. I couldn't remember anything. I'd walk into rooms and literally just stand there and think, why am I here? It was a running joke in my house, that I was losing my keys and my phone, on a regular basis. And I know lots of us do that, but it was getting out of control, the amount of times I was losing my keys and my phone. And
It's pretty scary too, isn't it, when you
it
kind of
is.
think about what it could be?
Yeah, well, exactly. And I remember, and this was happening a few years before, that I'd be in the middle of a conversation with somebody, and I'd get halfway through the conversation, I'd have no idea what I was going to say to them. I'd just have to stop midway and just sort of say, oh, I'm really sorry, I've lost my train of thought. But it was really, really embarrassing because this would have been while I was at work, it might have been during a meeting. So all of that was going on, and it was that was scary enough. And then I had weird things like my skin was really itchy, like crawly, this crawling sensation menopause all over my skin, which was weird. And I never used to suffer from headaches ever. And I started getting headaches almost on a daily basis. And I was just really, really scatty, incredibly tired. That overpowering tiredness that they talk about with the menopause.
I feel like I've just been tired since I had children, to be honest with you. But
Yeah, I remember at some point during those years before I turned 46, I went to the doctors a couple of times, talking about how tired I was. My dad died of cancer when he was 50. So it's always on my mind, oh my God, is there something worse wrong with me? And that's what was happening. And then the biggest symptom that I had was these outbursts of anger, of real rage. And, they were directed at my son, who was 11 years old. He's a really good boy. He doesn't do anything wrong. And the sort of things I was getting cross with him about were so minor. And, I talk about this on my podcast in the first episode, but, this one day I picked him up from school and I was asking him what he'd had for lunch that day. And he told me he'd had chicken wings. And I said, oh, that sounds great. What did you have those with? And he said, well, I had chicken wings. I said, yes, but what did you have them with? And he said, chicken wings. I said, yes, but what did you have them with? And I got so angry, and I was like, you could have had chips. You could have had potatoes. If I'd asked you, if you asked me what was going to be for dinner and I just said chicken and you said, what was that with? I'd tell you what that was with. And I was driving at the time, and the rage just hit an all-time high, to the extent where I thought I was going to steer the car off the road. And that was because he didn't tell me what he could have had with his chicken wings at school. And I think that was my moment where I just thought something's wrong here.
this just
Something is
shouldn't
wrong.
be happening. Yeah.
We both ended up in tears. Then, of course, I ended up hugely apologising to him and, not knowing what was going on. And then that night I listened to a podcast, which you referred to, and it was with Dr. Louise Newson, and she was talking about the menopause, and she ticked off absolutely every single symptom that I had. I can't tell you how much the weight was lifted off my shoulders that night. I actually started crying from relief because I suddenly realised I didn't have early
It's
onset.
like, I'm not broken.
Yeah, no, exactly. And this is why I'm getting so angry. And I think the next day I went to the doctors. I got I knew more than the GP, which I hear this story a lot, because I'd heard that podcast. I went in fully genned up with what to say, what I wanted out of the appointment, and she was fantastic, and she gave me the HRT. And within 2 weeks, I started to notice the difference. And I don't think I've shouted at my son like that since. It doesn't.
I'm sure he's very relieved.
I've not been out of control like that since I've been on the HRT. Thank God for it.
Let me talk a little bit about your career pivot then. How did you decide to take that leap and go after what you kind of, I guess, your soul had been hankering for all those years?
Yeah. So I always wanted to be a photographer, I think, if I look back, but I don't think sort of where I grew up that being a photographer was an option. I didn't think that people did that as a job, I think, so.
Did you do one of those stupid careers surveys like I did at school where you I don't know, like multiple choice thing? I think mine said something like, geography teacher.
Yeah, it tells you to work in a supermarket or something, doesn't it? I don't think I did one of those, but I do remember when we did work experience at school, I was lucky enough to go and do work experience at a radio station. And I absolutely loved that experience. So I think I always knew I wanted to work in the media, in that kind of field. And that's actually is what I ended up doing. So I worked for 10 years as a publicist in TV and radio, and I absolutely loved it. But a big part of being a publicist is working with photographers. And I absolutely loved that bit of my job, so I would be escorting photographers to photo shoots with whoever I was working with. And I just used to soak it all up, watched what they were doing and just wish I was doing what they were doing. But it was actually only after I had my son, when you are forced into that career break, that I actually thought maybe I could give this a go, because I had this year off where I thought, well, I could practice during this year. And my mum was very, very kind, and she paid for me to buy a set of studio lights. I don't actually use studio lights anymore, but I did then. And that kind of gave me the kickstart. So during that year, obviously I'd met a lot of people with babies during that first year, and I just started photographing, just practicing really, photographing all these people's babies. And I realized I absolutely loved it. So by the time the year came to an end, I just thought, well, it's now or never. My company wanted me to go back they wanted me to go back for 4 days a week with nobody covering the fifth day. So essentially, I would be kind of working full time. But
I think we've all been there.
And then I worked out that I would be at work more than I would be with my son. And, as I mentioned before, he was IVF, and I kind of knew that I possibly wouldn't be able to have any more children. And I didn't want that to happen. And I really wanted to be a photographer. So I just took the leap then. I thought, if they won't let me go back, I'd arranged for a job share to do 2.5 days a week. And they were big, no, we don't want you to do that. We want you 4 days or nothing. So I thought, right, well, I'll leave and I'll see what happens. And thank God I did. It took a long time to build my business up, but I'm now a full-time photographer. I've been doing it for 15 years, and I absolutely love it still to this day.
And we'll talk about your latest photography project in a moment, but let's go on to the podcast first of all. So, fellow podcast host, what made you and your friend Kate decide to set that up? What was the genesis of that project?
Yeah, I've got an active brain, so I think I'm always thinking of another creative project I can do, and I very often don't do any of them. So I think I've got books, where I write these things down. Oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And I think I've been talking about doing a podcast, something to do with the menopause, probably since I realized I was menopausal. So, it's kind of started then. And I just think the idea of starting a podcast seemed quite alien to me, and I didn't really know how to start, and I kept putting it off. But then, thanks to lockdown, it kind of gives you that breathing space, doesn't it? To sort of think, oh, I've got a bit of time on my hands now. I wonder how you do start a podcast. And I started looking into it. And I'm so pleased I did this, but obviously the crux of me starting this particular podcast was my menopausal symptoms, was the fact that I thought I had early onset dementia and God knows what else. And I was angry about it, if I'm honest with you, Emma. You
Mm.
know, I was,
Unprepared.
yeah,
So many people out there kind of suffering in silence, sometimes for years before they have their light bulb moment, if they're lucky.
yeah, exactly. And I was so cross that I went through that and I didn't know that all of these symptoms, and there's 34 of them, or probably more symptoms that are related to the menopause. And I didn't know about any of them apart from your periods going and feeling hot, you know, hot flushes. That's kind of
Mm.
all I knew about the menopause. And it made me so mad. And so I just thought, you know, I listened to that podcast and that helped me diagnose myself. So the whole point of me doing this podcast was to help one person. I thought if one person tunes in to this, realizes they're not going crazy, and
Yeah,
gets
we're paying it forward.
I'm paying it forward. And then I just thought, you know, there's lots of podcasts out there. I knew I couldn't do a medical podcast. You know, I knew I didn't want it to be something that was, you know, dishing out medical advice, because, you know, that's not us. But I just wanted to do something that was light-hearted enough, but with a really serious edge to it. And you know, I've told you that story about the chicken wings. That was a key moment for me, and I thought, I cannot be the only one who has a story like that, you know, where they've felt completely out of control, where their anger has gone, you know, off the chart, all because of their hormones. So the idea of my podcast is it's not just about the menopause, but it's all about those times when our hormones have been in charge, and anecdotes from women. It's like a confessional, really. Women write into us with their stories of what they might have said or done, and we read them out, you know. And thank God for my lovely co-host Kate. You know, I wouldn't have done it on my own. You know, it's one of those things where you kind of need to have a buddy. Well, I know you are doing it. Well done, you. But I kind of needed a buddy to do it with me. And the good thing about Kate is that she's younger than me, so she hasn't yet. Well, I say that she is now starting to. I think she'll mind me saying, she does mention it on the podcast, but she didn't know anything about the menopause, and she hadn't had any of these symptoms. So what's really good about the podcast is that she's learning at the same time as, you know, where these women are sharing their stories, and now she's starting to recognize just one or two things that she's learned from the podcast, and we then talk about that as well. So I've just absolutely loved doing it, and if any of your lovely listeners have any stories, or you, Emma, have any stories that they want to share, and like I said, it's not just about the menopause. We've had women writing in about you know, PMT outbursts and pregnancy hormones and all sorts of things. But it's just a real sort of privilege, I think, to share these stories, that women trust us enough to read their stories out. And also we have a really good laugh about it as well. You know, it's like, I know, obviously, you know, I was scared when I did all that with my son over the chicken wings, but actually the story itself is quite funny, you know, once you can step back and look at it. And there's,
Yeah.
yes, there's lots of moments, I think, where we can all laugh at what we've done, but at the same time learn about what we're doing, why, the reasons why we're being like that.
I think it's so powerful, isn't it? Being part of this cohort, and I know that I've said this before in other episodes, but you know, it does really feel like this generation, our Gen X, whatever you want to call it, early millennials, going through this now. There's this real, feels like there's a real power in terms of changing the narrative, but also making sure that the next cohort of people coming through this don't have to kind of have this ignorance and to fight to be heard or to be understood. And that's almost half the battle, right? If you're prepared, you understand what's happening potentially to you, you've got easy access to the information that you need, and you know how to advocate for yourself if you choose to kind of go down the HRT route. And
Yeah.
hopefully, you know, more and more GPs now getting up to speed with where they should be. I'm not going to do any GP bashing. My lovely sister-in-law is a GP. They're doing amazing stuff, but you know, there's work to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do feel like, you know, we're sort of slowly getting towards towards that point.
I know. Thank God we're in that generation. I feel really sorry for our parents and the women that have gone before us, who, you know, many of whom wouldn't have had the option of going on HRT, who genuinely thought that they were mad, who were treated like they were mad. You know, I just feel really, really lucky that we're part of this generation who don't mind talking about this stuff. When I think back to it, you know, it's the people like, you know, back in the 90s, you know, these were us women were all called the ladette culture, weren't we? Do you remember? And it was Zoe Ball and Sarah Cox, and they're all the people now who are out there talking about this stuff because we don't mind sharing. And thank goodness for it, because, you know, if it wasn't for like that podcast I heard, for women talking and sharing about it, I would still be in the dark right now and, you know, and having an absolute nightmare. So the more that we talk, I mean, it's still quite a shocking statistic, isn't it? How few people are even taking HRT, how few women are. I think there's a really tiny percentage.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that stems from the Women's Health Initiative sort of scare 20 years ago, that a lot of women stopped
Yeah,
taking it overnight, and still there are those preconceptions
yeah,
that a lot of people have, and you know, as you would do, right, if you haven't sought out more kind of modern, updated research and medical opinion, that's quite understandable. But yeah, but there's definitely still a long way to go in terms of kind of evening out that playing field so that everyone's got the access.
what worries me is, obviously, I think women, when we get to this age, so often, you know, we've worked so hard over the years, and a lot of women are at the top of their game, you know, when it comes to, you know, in their jobs, and so many women are having to leave their jobs.
It's 1 in 10, which staggers me. I think have either thought about leaving or left
Yeah,
jobs in that kind of age range.
and I find that, and marriages breaking down and all sorts of things, and um and I find that absolutely shocking, a shocking statistic. And and it makes me angry. That makes me angry. You know, that every single, it should be taught in schools, which I think it is going to start
Yeah.
to happen now, isn't it? Where we teach it in schools, and it should just constantly be part of the narrative with boys and girls. Everybody should know about it. It shouldn't be a word that people are scared of, or where people think, you know, this happened to my friend actually, or I was telling her when I first started taking HRT, and she's a bit older than me, and she was displaying all the symptoms and, you know, anxiety and all sorts of things. And I said to her, well, I wonder whether you too, you know, could be perimenopausal. And she went, I'm not that old. You know,
Yeah, there's definitely that kind of ageism, kind of stigma, taboo, which, yeah, again, we're all trying our best to break down.
yeah.
These things take time. Tell us a bit more about your 40 over 40 project. How did that start? Because I was just looking yesterday at the portraits so far, and they are brilliant. You are really good, really, really good at what you do. I think I love the Carolyn Harris photos. She looks amazing, and the Lizzo Reardon ones are very, very powerful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the 40 over 40 project really came about in the same way that the podcast came about. It was just, well, what I discovered in lockdown, just to go back a little bit, during lockdown, obviously all my work went overnight, and I was sort of left, as many people were, just thinking, will I ever work again? And during lockdown, so 6 weeks in, I started a charity project, and it was it was called Front Door Photo, and I photographed people standing at their front doors in return for a donation to charity. And the project, I thought it was going to, I set a target of raising £1,000. Well, I raised £1,000 in the first 24 hours. This
Wow.
just suddenly took off because nobody had anything to do, did they, in lockdown? So suddenly the idea of a photographer coming to your house and taking a family portrait was quite a lot
Quite a
of people.
novelty.
Yeah, and so what I thought was going to be like a week's project ended up being 2 months of photographing people at their front doors. I think I did about 500 households in the end. And that's just, actually, I've just had an exhibition for that at Alexandra Palace, for displaying all the photographs, which was lovely actually to look back at it all. But what I realised was I really enjoyed having a project. I didn't, you know, it was just really nice having something that wasn't anything to do with my work, I wasn't earning money for it. It was just a personal project. And I really, really enjoyed that. So fast forward, you know, after lockdown, and obviously all the stuff was happening with the menopause. And I just thought, well, it'd be quite nice to start another project. What project could I do? And this is what came to mind. I just thought there are so many. Through doing the podcast, you realise just how incredible women of our age are. I hear all these awful stories through the podcast of what these women have suffered, and I sort of think, wow, and yet they're so incredible, and they're keeping going, and they're running companies and all this stuff whilst the menopause is happening, and I just thought, wow, women over 40 are amazing. And what can I do to try and celebrate that fact? And obviously I'm a photographer, so the only thing I could think of doing was by taking some portraits. So I set myself a target of photographing 40 women all over the age of 40. When I very first started it, I had decided it was going to be completely focused on women who were championing the menopause, speaking out about it. So as you sort of mentioned some of the names already, the early women that I started doing were all about that. So I photographed Emma Skeets, who's the menopausal mayhem mother, and if you've seen her on Instagram, fantastic. Dr. Naomi Potter, I photographed. Carolyn Harris, who obviously was key at getting the HRT bill through, which she was an incredible woman. Diane Danzebrink. So I've done women that have, who are all about the menopause and getting that word out there. But then I just thought, this is what's lovely about having a personal project. There's no real agenda, and I've tweaked it now. And I just think it's not going to be just about women who are talking about the menopause. I just want it to be about women who are over 40, who are just amazing and doing their own thing. So I'd recently photographed Tracy Brabin, who's the mayor of West Yorkshire, and she was the woman who took over from.
She's got a great story, hasn't she? Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you. She took over from Jo Cox, you were saying.
That's right. Yeah. So she used to be an actress. She was in Coronation Street, and then she was on the campaign trail with Jo Cox, and then obviously Jo Cox was brutally, murdered in the street. And one of Tracy's friends, Tracy said, what can I do? What can I do to help? And this friend said to her, I don't suppose you've ever considered being an MP. So she then went on the campaign trail and she took Jo Cox's position, and it was an MP for many years, and now she's the mayor of West Yorkshire, and she's 60. And I just think, what a woman. This has all happened in her menopausal years. She's done an about turn, and look what she's achieving. So the project now is just about women who inspire me, full stop, and so long as they're over 40 they qualify.
And yeah, you're never going to run out of people, to be honest. There's a lot of them out there.
Yeah, exactly. And also there's no deadline with this project as well, which I'm really enjoying. So I think I've photographed 10 women now. And what's lovely is every time I photograph somebody, they sort of have a chat with me, and they kind of maybe recommend somebody else, and I think, I hadn't thought about going down that route, that might be a good idea. And so I'm just keeping it very, very fluid, and I'm just going to see who I end up meeting. And I'm loving meeting all these women.
You've had some really great names on there so far.
Yeah.
So are you, I guess, limited by geography that they would have to be in the UK or visiting the UK?
Ideally the UK, yes, but I have travelled. I've just photographed Sue Kent, actually, and she's a gardener on Gardener's World, but she's also thalidomide. So she does.
Yes, I know who you mean. Yeah.
Incredible. So I just feel like she lives in Wales, I mean, a long way away from me, so I actually travel to her. But she's a fantastic role model, I think, for people with disabilities to be on the TV at her age, because she's come to this, very later in life, and showing that, yes, she has a disability, but who cares, and look how amazing she is, and look what she can do. So she's going to be my next lady that I announce. Yeah. So it's just nice that and my mum recommended her, so it's just, I'm keeping it very open. And the menopause, the connection between all these women will be that they will be approaching or in their menopausal years. So I just, it's just basically one big, like, look at these amazing women. Look how amazing we are at this age.
And you are making them look incredible. Do you find? I mean, some of them will be used to being photographed, I guess, as part of their day job. But do you find there's something about that kind of that chemistry of being a kind of a portrait photographer and really letting them shine, that kind of creates a kind of magic.
That's absolutely how it works, yeah. Because I mean, sometimes when I turn up to photograph anybody, you know, there's a lot of nerves to start with because a lot of people haven't been photographed before. But so it's all about sort of building up trust, I think, with the subject. So we don't always start off taking the photo straight away. You know, we'll have a little bit of a chat. I'll try and ease them into it. And quite often, the photographs that I end up using are the photographs that I've taken towards the end of the session when
They're
they've
more relaxed.
yeah, they were totally relaxed, and we've chatted the whole way through and had a good laugh, and I think that's when you get the best out of somebody. Then, you know, when they feel they can be themselves. But yeah, I mean, like you said, some of the women are used to sort of being on camera, or they're performers. So one of my favorite photographs is actually of Jennifer Kennedy. Are you aware of Jennifer Kennedy?
She's the blogger, is that
She's
right?
she's a menopause blogger, and she's absolutely hilarious. So I really recommend you look her up. It's Galloping Catastrophe.
Kind of makes middling along look very very bland. Galloping Catastrophe.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
Yeah, she's written a book, and she's also a stand-up comic. She's just done a set in Edinburgh, but she's amazing. And I came across her because I follow her on Facebook, and maybe I didn't follow her then, but somebody had shared this post that she'd written about open water swimming. So I really recommend you have a little look for this post. It was so funny. So when I met her to photograph her, I sort of said to her, look, I know this might sound a bit mad, but because, you know, you wrote that brilliant post about open water swimming, is there any way I could get you wearing a ridiculous swimming hat and maybe just wrapping the towel like that's a local park by the lake? And she's like, yeah, let's do it. You know, she was so up for it, and it's one of my favorite photos. She looks so cute and so cheeky, and I think sort of sums up, you know, how I want women to feel in their 40s. You know, I just want, you know, I kind of look at a photo and it makes me smile. Yeah, and I love it. So everyone I photograph has been very different, but everyone is sort of, I feel I'm trying to make sure all the photographs are very different and really represent that particular personality.
That's a real skill, kind of capturing that essence of somebody. So yeah, I'll link in the show notes to your website and to you on Instagram. And yeah, would definitely encourage people to go and have a look at the ones that you've got up there already, and keep an eye out for future updates. Are you able to tell us any of the other women that you've got coming up, or are you keeping it under wraps?
I'm keeping it under wraps a bit, but I don't have a massive list either, because I'm really trying to keep it as open as possible. I want it to just grow, you know, organically, and just see who comes up. So I have got a couple of people that are obviously that I've got in the pipeline, but no, I'm just keeping it nice and open to see what happens. But I must say, Davina McCall is on my list of must-have people. So I'll be working on that one.
She's got a book coming out very soon, so I'm sure she'd be.
The book is actually with Naomi Cotter, who I've already photographed. So maybe I need to tap Naomi.
I think you do. Surely, if she's good mates with Davina, she can get you.
Yeah. Come on, Davina.
Oh, Jenny, thank you so much for giving up your time. It's been lovely to chat to you, and I'll hope everyone checks out the 40 over 40. Check out the podcast.
Please write it in the podcast if you've got any stories. I want to hear.
I'm racking my brain now for funny stories that aren't too don't put me in too bad of a light.
You can be completely anonymous. This is what I have to tell everybody. You know, we change the names all the time. So if there is anything you'd like to contribute, we would love to hear it. And also anyone who listens to your podcast, if they've got anything they want to share.
How do they share with you, Jenny? Have you got an email for the...
There's an email address, so it's dearhormones@yahoo.com, or they can message us on Instagram. So we're at Dear Hormones on Instagram, so they can find us there as well. But yeah, we are planning our season 3 as we speak. So now all my building work is finished, I can finally start recording again.
The joy of recording in the home setting. Thanks again, Jenny. It's been lovely to meet you.
Thank you so much, Emma.
You've been listening to the Middling Along podcast. Do remember to subscribe to be notified when our next episode is live. And why not visit the blog at www.middlingalong.com to sign up to my newsletter as well. I do hope you enjoyed listening today. If you did, I'd be really grateful if you would consider leaving a short review, as that helps people find the podcast and helps get it noticed. Hope you can join us next time. Goodbye for now.